Welcome to the Crisis Response Journal podcast. Today we have Natalie Maroun, an expert in risk and crisis management with a stellar 15-year background. From international collaborations with the WHO and the World Bank to her pivotal role at the Kenyon International Emergency Services, her insights on crisis management are not to be missed. Stay tuned to uncover her insights on crisis leadership and more. Welcome, Natalie.
Hello.
So I know I've just briefly touched upon this, but could you tell our listeners about your background in crisis management?
Yes, of course. Hello. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. I started my career as a lecturer in university, and then at some point that there was an opening for a position to support crisis simulation exercises design and implementation at the national level in in the French Interior Ministry. So my first contact with crisis management was through simulation exercises, and then I had the opportunity to join. A consultancy firm called Highbridge. So I left the public service. After COVID, I founded my own consultancy firm. It's called Element. And I'm a happy leader of a small team of 5 very committed consultants that are dedicated to crisis management and management of uncertainty.
Thank you. So over your distinguished career in risk and crisis management, what have been some of the most significant shifts or trends you've observed in how organizations approach crisis management, especially in light of evolving global security landscape?
I would note 3 main shifts. First, the first shift happened, I would say, a little more than 10 years ago, where we did question the link between risk and crisis, that the fact that it was not that automatic. And there was an awareness that compliance to rules and regulations is not enough, neither to avoid any kind of crisis to occur, and also that crisis management is mainly about dealing with the unknown. So this is the first shift. The second, I think, is technological, through all the platforms and applications that are dedicated to crisis management, through threat intelligence and response planning. So this allows a more global understanding of the situation and also a swifter response to the crisis. But of course, this will never replace the human decision making. I think that the third swift happened after COVID pandemics, and it's about a holistic approach to crisis management, an approach that takes into account the human factor, but also the environment, in fact, in which a crisis may occur. So I think that this shift uh, is about the important role that strategic intelligence, for example, and threat monitoring have in the planning and in the response to the crisis, and how we can cover all the global security challenges in preventing and responding to crisis.
Thank you. So given your background in international cooperation, could you tell us about a particularly challenging international crisis leadership mission you were involved in and the key lessons that you learned from it?
I would like to tell you that between 2018 and the end of 2019, I was a part of an expert group that was deployed in Sierra Leone with the World Bank to develop and implement a strategic plan for the prevention and response to pandemics. So end of 2019, it was just before the COVID pandemic. The first challenge was related to the field itself and the context because this mission happened after the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone. So, one of the most important challenges was that everything was everything was about Ebola. In fact, in the conception of the stakeholders, and not about other threats. So it was a little tricky. The second challenge was more related to international cooperation, and I would say that this is a challenge we can face in all international cooperations when we have different approaches, different agendas, etc. And the important question in this case is to ask ourselves what is the best for the country and what is the best for its citizens. Now, what about the ownership of the project and how can we ensure its sustainability? A few years after COVID pandemics, if we look a little back in the mirror, I would say that the approach proved that we and all the local stakeholders did a good job, and all the different authorities, ministries, etc. So, especially regarding border control and its role in pandemic prevention, and also about the rapid response team, which implemented an appropriate response to COVID in Sierra Leone. The third challenge is also very specific to the field. It's about the lack of means, especially in capacity building challenges, um, and the difficulty, I would say, uh, between the planning and the implementation due to this lack of capacity building.
Okay, thank you so much. So, could you share a specific experience where your work with the International Crisis Observatory challenged your perspectives on crisis management and how this experience influenced your subsequent approach to handling similar situations?
One of the experiences that challenged me the most through the International Crisis Observatory was regarding the response to Beirut port blast. My mission for the International Crisis Observatory was to work on a strategic approach of the crisis management. So I chose to work on the Build Back Better approach. My surprise was that on the field, there was a misunderstanding about the concept of crisis management and the concept of humanitarian relief. I was convinced that we had to start planning the future and not only arrange the current situation with bits and bytes. And this experience comforted me in the necessity of the holistic approach. I sincerely hope that Lebanon will soon switch to this holistic or comprehensive approach to tackle the challenges the country is facing, either on global security level, but also to tackle the difficult socioeconomic context, or I would say crisis, the country is going through.
And given your involvement with the Kenyon International Emergency Services, a key player in disaster management, what do you see as the most pressing challenges in the field of global emergency management today? And how do you believe these challenges can be effectively addressed on an international scale?
Before talking about the present challenges, I would like to talk about the empathy I learned through my collaboration with the Kenyon International teams. It's the fact of being able to put oneself in the shoes of the stakeholders, wherever they are victims, they are impacted shareholders, or the community, in fact. The most pressing challenge, I think, is to put aside the automatic technical response to any crisis situation and to focus on the human aspect and on the needs of the community. The challenges in the field of global emergency management today, I would say, is first not to stick to a technical response that doesn't take into account the socio-economical aspects of the field. Second is to be prepared to face the unprevented, because we can never know the field the way it will be once we are deployed on it. And third, I think it's a very important challenge, is to be aware of the cultural specificities, especially on international scales. And to conclude this question, I would quote Hippocrates with his famous "do no harm." So to be able to implement the response we think is adequate to the challenge and to the emergency created by the disaster itself, but without harming the communities or the political and economical infrastructures of any part of any country.
Thank you. So, changing the subject slightly, considering the rapid advancements in technology, particularly in the context of crisis response, what do you believe are the most promising technological innovations that have the potential to revolutionize crisis management strategies? And how do you envision their implementation on a global scale?
I recently had the opportunity to review some of the innovations that were presented as a member of the Milipol Innovation Award jury. And I'm very happy to see how much advanced is the reflection and how the shift from pen and paper to adapted tools through innovation is going. Today, everybody is talking about artificial intelligence and how it can be implemented in different sectors, different industries and services. But I think that crisis management and crisis communication also have to be on the priority list of AI innovation to help, for example, process a huge amount of data, and also to face the rapidity that is requested from the responder to a crisis situation. But of course, we cannot expect from the artificial intelligence to take into consideration, I'll say in an adapted manner, the fears or the expectations or even some human impacts of a crisis or of a sensitive situation.
And so, with your involvement in various crisis response and management activities, what are the key components you believe are essential for building a robust crisis management framework for international organizations, particularly in the context of the increasing global security threats?
I would say no crisis book can cover all scenarios. And recent events in the world have taught us that anything, however big or improbable, can happen. The recent pandemic, for example, but also the armed conflicts that are now occurring. I think it's more than ever time to prepare international organizations or governmental bodies to be prepared for the unexpected and sometimes for the impossible. And I think that goes through capacity building, but also into making sure that the processes allow a certain level of flexibility in order to have, in the same time, a swift reactivity, but also an adaptation to any unforeseen event.
And based on your vast experience, what are some common misconceptions or oversights that organizations tend to make when it comes to crisis preparedness? And how do you recommend they proactively address these gaps to ensure comprehensive readiness for any potential crisis?
The first misconception is that crisis only happens to others. And unfortunately, this mindset does not allow a proper preparation to any kind of crisis response. On the other hand, some other common misconceptions can fortunately be tackled through, for example, awareness raising or capacity building. And among these, the fact that processes alone are not enough because processes and procedures are never exhaustive and that they do not take into account situations that were not foreseen. Another misconception is to think that there's no need for active preparation, that documentation is enough. But I think that preparation is key, mainly through crisis simulations, because only a simulation can test the procedures and help prepare a comprehensive readiness, and taking into account the technological means, the procedures, but also the human preparedness.
Thank you. So, given the current global security landscape, what are the most critical areas that governments and organizations should prioritize in their crisis preparedness strategies? And how can they effectively collaborate to address these challenges?
In a crisis situation, whether it's about security or not, government and organization should consider all dimensions that could be impacted by crisis. Focusing on one more than the other can sometimes lead to new escalations in this situation. So I think that the best preparedness measure is to apply before before and during a response, a holistic approach to managing a crisis. As a matter of fact, I am convinced that it's only when we deal with the actual cause of a crisis and not only its consequences or its impact that the crisis management can effectively overcome a situation. So managing the impacts of a crisis is not enough to overcome the crisis itself. This being said, I think that governments and international organizations have to prioritize all aspects of global security, starting from the basic needs, such as availability of food, water, medication, to the most sophisticated, such as the economical security. And I would like to insist, in conclusion to this question, that on the importance of strategies that are built hand in hand with the communities and with the stakeholders to allow an ownership and the empowerment of the communities, but also to allow the best uh, means to make the strategy implemented if needed.
And looking ahead, what do you envision as the most crucial priorities for the field of crisis management? And how can events such as Milipol Paris contribute to the advancements of global security efforts and the exchange of best practices in crisis management on an international platform?
It's pretty difficult to look ahead, and crises show us that it's almost never impossible, in fact, to really look ahead. But I'm pretty sure and I'm convinced that global security and crisis management would gain a lot from the civil military cooperation. As a member of the Milipol Innovation Award jury, I reviewed many fabulous projects, but I was a little disappointed that the usage were solely focused on civil or on military fields. And I'm happy that Milipol allows and enhances cooperation between civils and military approaches. I say that I'm confident that the best practices can be shared between these two complementary approaches.
Thank you. So, just finishing off and bringing our focus back to Milipol, could you tell us what you're most looking forward to at the conference this November? Can you share with us any exciting bits?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to participate to this year's Milipol event. Um, First of all, very excited to meet the candidates to the Milipol Innovation Awards because I reviewed very exciting and very interesting projects that were anonymous, and I'm really excited to see who are the companies and who are the people behind these innovations. I'm also, as I mentioned before, very excited to to see how the collaboration and how the cooperation between civil and military approaches can be enhanced.
Thank you so much. So, this is the end of the podcast, but thank you so much for coming on to the podcast this morning. It's been fascinating hearing all things crisis management. And to the listeners, Milipol Paris is truly an event that cannot be missed, so please do come along this November to explore all things security. Thank you for listening and see you all in Paris.